Welcome to session 3 of Motivating Reluctant Learners. So, in this session, we're going to look at ways we may be unintentionally making it difficult for our students to invest in our classrooms. So, this is going to involve starting where students are and considering our classrooms from their perspective. We're going to examine a few common classroom barriers to investing, and we're going to look at ways that we can tweak small things in our classroom environments to make investing in those environments a bit easier. So, I'm going to start by talking about 20th century classrooms versus 21st century students. And the problem of motivation is magnified when 21st century learners are being asked to navigate 20th century classrooms and oftentimes curriculums. In 20th century classrooms, learning was essentially linear. Problems had logical solutions, and there was usually a step-by-step process for arriving at an answer. And because learning was linear, so was motivation. Teachers tended to employ a standard series of rewards and punishments, and if students complied, they received rewards. If they failed to comply, they faced punishment. This expectation was that if students did what they were told, they would be successful. But the kind of learning necessary for the 21st century is not so much linear as it's geometric. We face more complex problems, new technologies, ambiguity that comes with that, the speed of information. All of these things mean that arriving at the answer is no longer a strictly step-by-step process. In order to solve problems nowadays, we juggle multiple perspectives and we navigate a complex maze of data. And in this non-linear world, where students no longer necessarily expect A to lead to B, motivation efforts based on this system of rewards and punishments, they don't always still work. So there are plenty of rewards that can be found inside schools, and there's lots of different traditional punishments that have lost their sting. So I have a few students come to mind. Suspension no longer, excludes students from learning or from their social circles. They can still chat with their friends throughout the day. They still find a way. They still find a way to keep up with everything that is going on in their classroom without having to bother actually attending. So for some students, especially with motivation issues, this is a bonus. You might even find it a more interesting and engaging learning experience online or away from the classroom. Detention, staying in, if you have recess, it's easily endeared when it's possible to just text or play games on a phone, right? Our students may seem unmotivated in the classroom, but outside the classroom, they devote hours to building new websites, updating, blogs or social media networks, texting friends, reading materials online, playing video games. The learning they do on their own is this dynamic, multimodal, mobile, collaborative thing, right? And traditional classroom activities are controlled. They're one way, they're static, and they're meant to be done alone. And they offer few chances for students to use the skills and knowledge they see as valuable. So what I'm trying to say is if we want to motivate 21st century learners, then we first need to find ways to make our classrooms more conducive to their 21st century currencies. Happily, it is possible to do this by making some simple shifts in instructional practices. For instance, instead of always having students complete assignments independently, we could have more opportunities for collaboration. Rather than relying on a textbook as the sole source of information, we can allow students to learn through a variety of medias. So we can use films, websites, podcasts, all that stuff. Instead of having students solve problems with predictable solutions, we can give them problems with unpredictable outcomes and real-world applications. But also, instead of trying to move our 21st century students toward the behaviors that we'd like to see via carrots and sticks, we can use this taking a step back and allow them to take these steps on their own. The task here, though, is to identify and remove barriers to investment and set up a classroom that students will choose to take part in. This brings us to our barrier number 1, requiring currencies that students don't have. So our students come to us with a myriad of experiences. Some of those experiences prepare them to do well in school, while others impair their ability to invest in their learning. Many of these factors we can't control, right? We can't control the kind of parents our students have. We can't control the amount of sleep they get each night. We can't control their nutrition or their home study environment. We can't control how much money their family has or how much money they spend. We can't control what our students do outside of school, who they play with, who they hang out with, where they go, what they see. And while all of these things can significantly affect students' motivation, they're outside our control as teachers. So what we can control, in fact, and the only thing we control, is what we do in the classroom. So we're going to focus on what we as teachers can do to remove 3 common classroom barriers that prevent students from investing. As we talk about this, think about your own classroom and the investments you want your students to make. And we're going to try and look for ways that we might be unintentionally preventing our students from investing successfully in our classrooms. So, this is number 1, requiring currencies students don't have. Man, where to start? I'm trying to think of an example. I think of a teacher I worked with once who told me that taking their students to the computer lab and to create graphic data and systems they'd gathered during a science experiment, and after like 20 minutes in lab, none of the students had completed any of their data work. Not their tables, not their graphing of their information. And the teacher reminded the students that, these are due at the end of the hour. This teacher went from student to student, encouraging them to get their tables done. He even threatened the distracted students with detention if they didn't get back on task. But these efforts didn't do much good because at the end of the period, nobody had completed the assignment. And I'm sure that's a feeling that we've all had in our classrooms where what seemed to be a pretty straightforward task ends up not being accomplished by any students. And initially, this teacher bemoaned their students' lack of motivation. It just seemed that, these students couldn't care less about graphing their data. But eventually what they realized after the fact was that their students simply didn't understand how to use the program that they were using. It wasn't Google Sheets, it wasn't any of that in order to update their information. So it wasn't that they didn't want to do the work or they were choosing to surf the web or chat with their friends instead. They just didn't understand the nuance or they didn't have the currency that the assignment required. This was a case of a teacher unintentionally creating a classroom barrier to student investment. And it happens all the time, right? We give assignments with directions that are unclear, or we might ask students to apply currencies they don't possess. And the way to figure out if this barrier is a factor in our classroom is to examine each of those assignments and activities during our planning stage to identify exactly what we're asking students to do. What currencies, what tools or skills or knowledge will students need to complete the assignment or participate in the activity? So do all our students have access to these tools? Do all our students know how to use these tools? Do all our students have the skills and knowledge that this assignment or activity we're asking them to do and apply? That brings us to barrier number 2, not clarifying which currencies are required. So we probably know very well which skills or knowledge or behaviors each of our assignments and activities is calling for, but sometimes it's a mistake to assume that our students do as well. So during planning, this is one of those things that we can take a look at our assignments and our associated materials, and we can look for ways that we can make the requirements clearer. Coming from a co-teaching background, I think of this as just straightforward scaffolding, but it was surprisingly impactful, changing the wording or simplifying my directions, made it surprisingly more relevant to more students. Outside of the ones that I thought it would help naturally, it helped many more students. So, for example, students need to look up a vocabulary word, right, in order to complete this assessment. Is this point noted in the directions? How do they do that? What's the best way that they can do that? Do you get points for discussion using this word? Do you get points for looking at who's speaking during a presentation? Can we remind students of these requirements throughout the discussion, before the discussion, after the discussion? Are students going to need to complete an assignment in a particular way? Would it be more helpful to provide an example or explain how to use a sample response or performance before they start their work? Any of those things are things that we can use to help remove this barrier. Barrier number 3, insisting on our preferred currencies. This is my Achilles heel. Most of us are not fully aware of all times the currencies that we value in the classrooms, or the influences this valuation has on our instructional decisions and our classroom policies. So the truth is, we have preferred currencies, and that has a powerful effect on students' motivation. Clearly, if students have the same currencies that they need to be successful in the classroom and they match, they're going to be more likely to invest in what's going on. However, sometimes we insist on students always using the specific set of currencies that we value most without giving them a chance to use any of the other currencies that they may bring with them. So we limit their opportunities for investment and even risk shutting some of them out entirely. So identifying this third classroom barrier to investment involves taking a careful look at our own instructional decisions and classroom rules and our policies and procedures. We want to ask ourselves whether we might be unintentionally demotivating students by insisting on doing things our way and our way only. For example, we may prefer that our students write only in black pen, but is it really necessary to require them to do so? I may think that it's valuable for students to complete an anticipation guide or fill out notes using this specific template every single time they read a chapter, do any homework, but is it really indispensable to learning to do it that way? So I may think that the best kind of group discussion is those in which each individual takes a turn speaking and there's no crosstalk or interrupting. But is that how our students would describe the best kind of group discussion? I think about these different preferred currencies that crop up in the classrooms that I've been in recently in instruction. And sometimes it's worth asking ourselves how essential these skills or these ways of working and ways of behaving really are to learning, to see if we can include any other currencies. So do students really need to keep their class notebooks according to our specific outline, or are there other organizational strategies that may also work? Do students have to sit in alphabetical order, or can they get their work done and pay attention if they sit in a different spot, right? So in short, we can address this third classroom barrier by allowing students more options when it comes to tackling assignments, behaving, and demonstrating understanding. And students are more likely to invest in a classroom where their ways of knowing or being or doing are valued and accepted. But it brings up this counterpoint that always pops into my mind that, if I'm going to advise myself to stop insisting on my own preferred currencies, am I telling myself that my preferred currencies are wrong? But I think this is this thing that teachers tend to teach according to the way that we ourselves learn best. And this works out great for students who do it exactly as we do, but it can be tough for students who don't share our learning style or preferences, or we have to adopt our way of doing things, provided they have the currencies to do so, and they will. But if they don't, it's natural to prefer a particular set of currencies, and we value these currencies for a reason, but often there are skills, knowledge, behaviors that we know will support school success. So study skills, for example, are preferred form of currency for most teachers, simply because most of us have seen how students who study effectively are more likely to retain content or acquire and refine new skills, and ultimately they'll understand key concepts. We're confident that students who carry and use this currency will have an easier time learning. But what I have to remind myself sometimes is that study skills encompass a wide range of strategies. And sometimes I get myself in trouble when I insist on students studying in one specific way rather than allowing them to choose from and experiment with a variety of study strategies and find instead an approach that is the most effective for them. So I guess the key is not to allow our own preferred currencies to overwhelm our classroom so that there's no spaces for students to use alternative forms of currencies to help them learn. All right, we'll get on to how to build a classroom worth investing in. The good news is we can make our classrooms more motivating by building in structures that make it easier for students to invest than it is to opt out. So research shows that motivation depends on this sense of autonomy, mastery, purpose, and belonging. And with this mindset, making even small environmental tweaks to imbue our classrooms with these qualities can make a huge difference. Our reading this week kind of focuses on one of these shifts, emphasizing effort. So last week's reading hinted at this idea of effort. They said in our reading last week that more than half of all students in grade 6 and up reported being either not engaged or actively disengaged in school. But if you spent some time in our primary school, you would not believe this statistic to be possible. Because at the beginning of their academic journeys, students are filled to the brim with enthusiasm to learn. Anything I've seen in classrooms, anything their teacher says is straight gold. Then we have the slow fade that happens, and moving into 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, middle school, beyond, they need a reason to be interested just beyond a teacher's excitement. And we have the data to back that up nationally. We know that for many of these students, well-intended consequences like phone calls home and zeros in the gradebook that may be effective with achievement-motivated peers are rarely effective at turning things around. So for these students, we have to figure out a way to change our thinking and our strategies. So we're going to read this week about how we can emphasize effort in order to build student confidence and boost motivation. But why is that important? So putting the focus on effort is crucial to increasing motivation. Researchers and writer Carol Dweck uses this term mindset to describe the way people think about ability and talent. Dweck says that students who believe that ability, I'm not smart enough, are far more likely to do worse in school and in life than those who see effort, I need to work harder, as the most important. Dweck delineates between two different mindsets that exist on a continuum. This has been so impactful to me. If you get a chance to read this book, it's fantastic, both as an adult but also as a parent. So the first mindset is this fixed mindset, which suggests that your abilities are innate and unchangeable. The second is a growth mindset, which views ability as something that you could improve through practice. And in a fixed mindset, you view failure as permanent. But in a growth mindset, you see failure as a chance to learn and to even pivot. So those with a fixed mindset are more likely to view critical feedback as a personal attack, while those with a growth mindset will see it as a chance to improve and develop new systems. With a fixed mindset, you're more likely to choose easier tasks and put in minimal effort, because if talent is fixed, then why bother improving? But if you have a growth mindset, you're more likely to embrace challenging tasks and work hard to improve. Those with a fixed mindset are more likely to give up when they face an obstacle. Meanwhile, those with a growth mindset will view obstacles as a chance to experiment and solve problems. Fixed mindset is about measurable accomplishments, and growth mindset focuses more on a journey of continual improvement. With a fixed mindset, you're less likely to take creative risks, but with a growth mindset, creative risks are simply a way to innovate and improve. Ultimately, your mindset influences everything from creative risk-taking to how you view feedback to whether or not you finish difficult tasks. And in the end, it's one of the greatest factors in determining whether or not people grow and improve in their abilities. I watch this happen real time in a classroom. Students finish a math test, and students with a fixed mindset get their score back. And they automatically look around the room for people who they did better than. People with growth mindsets look at their incorrect answers and see if there was any creative ways to go about solving those problems that they didn't think about the first time around. So think about this. Sometimes this mindset is task dependent. As adults, think about something that you have a growth mindset in. So for me, it's teaching. I've made more mistakes as a teacher than I've had successes, but I feel like each time I step into the classroom and I try something new, I improve my craft incrementally. Now, think of something that may be challenging for you. My example is art. I do not view myself as an artist. In fact, if you told me I could eventually create something even as good as a poor movie poster, I would call you a bold-faced liar. But with art, I have this fixed mindset. And it prevents me from putting forth the effort to become better because I don't think I can get better. I think my talent in art is fixed and there's no worth putting in an investment into it to get better. So if we as adults have these things that we are fixed in and these things that we are growth mindseted in, students have that as well. I'm going to tell you one more story. Inside the classroom, the concept of mindset can become contagious. So I'm going to give you a story. Last week I had an average playthrough of one of my favorite board games of all time. It's titled Twilight Imperium. It is a 10-hour board game. It's a true gamer's game. It involves a substantial amount of investing in time and strategy and finesse. However, we had a player drop out and we had a new player this time around that didn't exactly identify as a board gamer. So about an hour into the game, with their situation looking pretty bleak, they gave up and they conceded their resources to the player on their left. And this move in games completely changes the power dynamics, and it led to snowballing a different player to victory. And we call that in gaming kingmaking. So the point of my story is this: fixed mindset only gets in the way of improvement, but if it's too prevalent in the classroom, it can prevent other students from adopting a growth mindset. So what happened in the game was some of the people who do view themselves as gamers had the same mentality become contagious to them. So this person who said, I am not a board gamer, I do not do these things, that mentality of a fixed mindset spread until there was only 2 people left playing this 10-man board game. So, brings us to our homework this week. It's brought to you in a couple parts. First part is we want to read through our mentor text, chapter 1, emphasizing effort. And I want you to think, this is the practical side of things, the book. What ideas or strategies or suggestions do you read about that you're encouraged to try, and why? And then which ones give you some hesitation? Part 2 has to do with that mindset. Dweck tells us that over time, students who believe that success is primarily due to effort do far better than those who believe that is due to ability or luck. But how might this knowledge influence what you say or do to motivate students who tend to give up easily, or to ease the stress of perfectionists in the classroom? And the third question is, what are some alternatives to grading, letter grades, that provide useful feedback? What are some ways that we could use these grades to best promote learning? All right, next week we're going to talk about this theory of understanding and addressing student resistance. But on the practical side of things, we're going to talk about creating confidence and hope. Looking forward to seeing and hearing what you come up with in our discussion this week.